Hello, my name is José Alejandro Trujillo, and before we begin, I'd like to share something very special with you. The story you're about to see wasn't written by a professional author, but by someone who simply had a dream. A dream born from the depths of my imagination and my heart. Thanks to the help of artificial intelligence tools that supported me by correcting my grammatical and spelling mistakes, I've been able to shape this work and share it with the world. Love of a Landowner is not just a story, it's a part of me. In fact, this novel was born from a song I wrote with the same name, included in my album Latin Lover. With all my heart, I present to you this project. I hope you enjoy it, that it moves you, and that you stay with me until the end. Welcome to Love of a Landowner. Chapter 1, The Man Who Came from the Sea. The sun was setting over the red lands of Veracruz when a creaking wooden cart arrived at the town square. The mules snorted, exhausted, and the golden dust of the road rose like incense at an altar. From the cart stepped down a man with a sober appearance, wearing a wide-brimmed hat, clean boots despite the journey, and a gaze already laying claim to everything he saw. His name was Don Antonio Martín de la Cruz. Originally from Cadiz, he brought little luggage with him, but carried an unshakable faith. He wore a rosary around his neck and had a small bound Bible among his belongings. He was a devout and God-fearing man, and although he sought prosperity, he knew that any fortune not built on justice and respect for others would be cursed. He walked through the square with an open heart, silently praying that heaven would reveal the purpose of his arrival. He stopped at the central fountain, where children played in the water while the town's women wove and sold fruit. An old man with a white beard watched him with interest. "Good afternoon, stranger," said the old man. "Clean boots are rare on dusty roads." "Good afternoon, sir. I come from afar, but I seek neither land nor gold. I seek meaning." "Then you're closer than you think," replied the elder with a tired smile. "Any man who comes without seeking riches usually finds treasure." He requested a room at Don Rogelio's inn, an old mestizo with thick eyebrows and a wary gaze. He offered him a simple but clean room. When Don Antonio paid with gold, respect blossomed immediately. "What brings you here, stranger?" asked Don Rogelio. "Business, adventure, or punishment?" "To find what I still don't know I'm missing," Don Antonio replied, never taking his eyes off the sky. In the following days, he walked the town, kindly greeting merchants, mule drivers, and market women. He earned the respect of many through his fair manner and the way he listened attentively, without arrogance. He soon discovered that the cattle trade was monopolized, but there was untapped wealth in tanning hides. He began with a few head of cattle, observing the work of the men, and hired those who worked with soul, not reputation. One afternoon, while Don Antonio watched from the shade of a mesquite tree, he saw a man named Matias kneel to drink water, his hands trembling. Beside him, a young girl with a pale face and large eyes sat on a sack of salt. She couldn't walk. She sang softly, with a sweetness that chilled the blood and soothed the soul. "Who is she?" Don Antonio asked a nearby worker. "Matias' daughter. Her name is Dolores. She was born that way. She can't walk, but her voice makes the wind cry." Upon hearing that, Don Antonio approached gently. "Good afternoon, sir," he said to Matias. "Good afternoon, patroncito," Matias replied without lowering his gaze. "Your daughter, what is she singing?" "She sings what she dreams. And she dreams all day because she cannot run. But she sings freely." Don Antonio crouched slightly, with respect. "Miss, what is the name of that song?" Dolores looked up. Her eyes were a universe. "It doesn't have a name. It's for my mom in heaven. I sing so she won't forget me." Those words were etched into Don Antonio's heart. From that day on, every time he passed by, he stopped to greet Dolores. He brought her wildflowers, pieces of sweet bread, small books of poems. She told him her dreams. He spoke of the seas and the wind he had crossed to get there. One afternoon, Don Antonio saw Matias carrying his daughter in his arms, barely able to stand. His face contorted in pain. Upon reaching the estate, he nearly collapsed but managed to set her down in a wooden chair. "Take him to the doctor," Don Antonio ordered firmly. No. Matias gasped. What will become of my daughter if I'm not here? Don Antonio looked at him with respect and, without a word, approached the chair. I'll carry her, he said softly. You go ahead, and I'll catch up with her. He bent down and lifted her in his arms as if she were the most delicate thing he had ever held. Dolores, the serene-eyed girl, looked at him directly. He looked back. There was no fear, only unexpected electricity. The touch of their breath, the fragility of her body in the arms of that strong and noble man, created a sacred silence. And then it happened. Without thinking, without words, they kissed. It was a brief kiss, restrained by duty, but charged with something greater than both of them. It was the beginning of something unstoppable. In the days that followed, Don Antonio could no longer deny it, his love for Dolores had taken root. He found excuses to visit them, helped build a new ramp for her chair, brought her music, spoke to her of poetry, his mother, and his childhood in Cadiz. She, in turn, spoke of the countryside, of butterflies that landed on her skirt, of nights when she sang to the moon. One night, under the stars, the conversation deepened. You never looked at me with pity, said Dolores. I can tell. Because there's no reason. You're the most alive woman I've ever known. She looked at him, trembling. Don't say that unless you mean it. I mean it so much it hurts that I didn't say it sooner. They held hands. That's when they knew there was no turning back. The passion born in a gesture now burned in silence. And one night, without further delay, Don Antonio came before Matias. Don Matias, I know what I'm about to say, and I do not seek pity, but a blessing. I want to ask for your daughter's hand. Matias looked at him in silence. He didn't see a foreman, nor a foreigner, but a man who knew how to love without fear or prejudice. If God has brought you here, he finally said, then let it be his will. And so began the legacy of the de la Cruz family. Not born of power, nor gold, but of love. Chapter 2, The Wedding and the Vow. The news of Don Antonio Martín de la Cruz's wedding to Dolores spread like warm wind along the region's roads. It wasn't just a union of love, but a social event that stirred rumors, expectations, and envy. Don Antonio, a God-fearing man increasingly respected for his business acumen, decided there would be no secret or hidden wedding, the entire town would witness the love he felt. For weeks, every detail was prepared with care. The access roads were cleared, a white cloth canopy was raised in front of the church, and the laborers decorated the plaza with wildflowers and colorful pennants. Each afternoon, the bells rang, announcing that something big was coming. Dolores, seated in front of an antique mirror, spoke softly to her father Matias the night before. Papa, what if one day he realizes he could have had a healthy, wealthy woman, and not me? Daughter, said Matias, gently taking her hand, a man can have many things, but not many souls like yours. If he didn't know your worth, he wouldn't be doing so much for you. Sometimes, true love isn't about what's missing, but about what overflows. At dawn, Don Antonio dressed in a navy blue suit that had belonged to his father. Seeing his reflection, he stepped into the patio where Dolores waited in her wheelchair, accompanied by her father. You look beautiful, Antonio said without thinking. Not because of the dress, but because of the peace in your eyes. She replied with a trembling smile. I swear I will never stop loving you, even when my body can no longer sing. Then sing today, he said, bending down, because today begins our anthem. He invited every partner, every supplier, the workers, the tanners, the leather dealers, and their families. Carriages began arriving the day before. Women in pastel dresses with fans, men with new hats, and girls running between the carts like freed doves. Children tossed poppy seeds and older women whispered softly. He says he loves her. But you'll see, when the years go by and he tires of pushing the chair. Or when she can't give him children like some complete young woman could. Poetry is one thing, life is another. Just wait. Among the guests were beautiful young women from well-off families. Some of their mothers, seeing Don Antonio, muttered with pity that man would tie himself to a poor, sick woman with no future. More than one girl was secretly instructed, do whatever it takes, but don't let that man ruin his life. The celebration was joyful. Mole, barbacoa, sweet fruits were served, and guitars filled the air with tunes of love, courage, and destiny. There was a verse contest, a sack race for children, and men played dominoes beneath a mango tree. There were no shortage of tests. A green-eyed woman, a leather merchant, approached him while he was serving drinks to some elders. Don Antonio, would you like to visit my lands? I have cattle and hides, but also other treasures to show you. Thank you, ma'am, he said courteously. But I've already found the treasure I was looking for. Another young woman in blue approached with 2 glasses in her hands. They say good wine opens the heart, Don Antonio. Have a drink with me. My heart is already full. And the wine I need is already on my table. But while the verses floated and the lights twinkled like artificial stars, a young woman in a red dress approached Don Antonio. Will you dance with me, Don Antonio? She asked, smiling with the confidence of someone who had never been rejected. I'm engaged, he replied respectfully. A dance is no sin, she insisted, touching his hand. It's not the dance I fear, Antonio said, but the contempt disguised as courtesy. Come on, man. A woman like her won't keep you forever. You know it. The woman, wounded in her vanity, said aloud. You'll see. You'll be carrying that woman for the rest of your life. She's a burden. You, a strong, young man, chained by pity. What a shame. Dolores, nearby, heard it. She didn't cry. She slowly approached, her gaze firm. She speaks the truth, Antonio, she said softly, taking his hand. Look at me closely. I can't run with you, or dance with you, or give you children without pain. There's still time, you are free. Antonio looked at her in silence. His chest rose and fell as if holding a storm. Then he stood up forcefully, turned to the musicians and shouted. Silence! Stop the guitars! Everyone turned toward him. He stepped forward, took Dolores by the hand, and spoke clearly, like thunder. It's true my wife can't walk. But it's also true her soul is worth more than all of yours put together. She isn't a burden, she is my strength. And hear me well, woe to anyone who makes her cry with cruel words. For that day you will know me as your worst enemy. Silence fell. Then someone applauded. Then another. And soon, the whole town applauded, not Don Antonio, but the love that did not bow to mockery or arrogance. That night, beneath a cloudless sky, Don Antonio and Dolores pledged eternal love. Not with empty promises, but with truths that hurt and shone at the same time. That night, when they were alone, Dolores whispered. Antonio, what if one day your body desires things mine can't give? Then I will learn to love with the soul, not desire. Because there's fire that doesn't burn, and caresses given with the eyes. Toward the end of the celebration, as the moon rose over the tile roofs and the last guitars played soft ballads, a drunken man stood up unsteadily. He walked over to where Dolores sat and looked at her with glassy eyes, full of sadness and mockery. Poor men dream too, he said. Since I was a boy, I loved her and built a fantasy. And now my world has collapsed. Don Antonio approached calmly, looked him in the eyes, and said, I can help you. The man stared at him, lowered his head, turned around, and disappeared into the crowd, vanishing into the dark. The man, named Panfilo, rode that night toward his home. The alcohol made him sway even atop his old horse. He had to cross empty fields and dusty roads, and only the moon lit the path. Midway, a storm broke loose. Lightning cracked the sky, and wind shook the mesquites. Panfilo wrapped himself in his poncho, cursing the weather and his luck. Then a rider appeared through the mist, dressed in black with a large hat that covered most of his face. His horse was dark as the night. Where are you headed? He asked in a deep voice. Home, Panfilo replied without looking. And where's your home? In a small village behind the ravine. Ah. I'm headed there too. Why don't we ride together? And maybe stop by the cantina. Panfilo hesitated, then nodded. All right then. They rode together. Along the way, Panfilo opened up, pouring out his bitterness to the stranger. He spoke of broken dreams, the love he once had for Dolores, and the hatred burning in his chest. The man in black listened silently until he said, "You have a black soul, Panfilo. I like you. You're like a crow, black, cunning, and hungry to feast on what is already dead to you." Panfilo looked up. Under the moonlight, his eyes darkened even more. For a moment, it seemed something sinister entered him, taking over his spirit. They reached the cantina, which was about to close. The bartender was waiting for the last drunkards to leave. Panfilo stumbled in. "Give me a drink," he ordered. "We're closed, Panfilo," replied the bartender. "I said serve me." Two men in the corner, already drunk and itching for trouble, stood up at the noise. They saw in Panfilo an easy target to unleash their frustrations. They drew their knives. But Panfilo was faster. Cunning and confident, he faced them without hesitation. Soon, the floor was stained red as the bodies fell, groaning in pain. The bartender, trembling, poured a drink without a word. "It's on the house, Panfilo," he said. Panfilo took the glass, raised it, and said coldly, "I'm not Panfilo. I'm the Crow." Chapter 3, The Last Step of a Just Man. 2 years had passed since the emotional wedding of Don Antonio and Dolores. The Hacienda de los Montes was thriving beyond expectations. In honor of the hills where Dolores used to sing as a child while Matias and Don Antonio worked, the name was changed by the master's will. However, amidst all the grandeur, Matias, Dolores' father, remained the same humble man. He refused to accept privileges. He didn't want to be seen as the boss's father-in-law, but as just another worker. His dignity was stronger than his fatigue. But there was a shadow around him. A man named El Cuervo, with a hardened face and bitter gaze, used to frequent their home before the wedding. He never said what he felt, but everyone knew he was interested in Dolores. And when she married Don Antonio, his silence turned into resentment. One night, in a nearly empty cantina, he approached the table where Matias was drinking black coffee with hard bread. "What are you doing here, old man?" El Cuervo mocked. "Shouldn't you be sitting next to your rich son-in-law?" Matias looked up calmly. "I'm still the same. I don't need a special table or embroidered cloth." The other laughed, without joy. "Sure. Always so humble. But of course, your daughter isn't the same anymore. Now she combs her hair nicely, dresses like a queen, and sings like she knows her worth." Matias took a sip, then spoke slowly. "My daughter hasn't changed. She just has peace now, and someone who loves her well." El Cuervo slammed the table with an open palm. "It shouldn't have been him. A foreigner, Matias. You allowed it. You gave her away." "I didn't give her to anyone," Matias replied, his eyes ablaze. "She chose. And I respected her decision. As any father who truly loves should." Silence fell like lead. El Cuervo stared at his cup, his lips trembling. Matias stood up, placed a few coins on the table, and said in a low voice, "If you love her, let her be happy. If you envy her, stay silent. Don't come to me with blame that isn't mine." And he left, leaving the man drowning in his own poison. Race day arrived. The town was festive, colorful garlands hung from balconies, children ran around with spinning tops and balloons, and men talked about the favorite horse like it was a war. Stalls of fritters, sugarcane, and fresh waters were set up. Women sold flower necklaces, and young people gathered along the fences to watch the riders go by. Don Antonio was welcomed with applause. As usual, Matias helped organize the event. He picked up trash, secured fence ties, cleaned the horse's path. No one asked him to do it, but he was there. Don Matias, come rest for a while, said Elena, one of the estate's cooks. You've worked enough. I can't sit while others sweat, daughter, he replied with a smile. As long as I have breath, I will serve. You have a younger heart than all these boys, added Don Julian, one of the cattle dealers. Among the crowd, El Cuervo watched from the shadow of a tree. Beside him, a drunk and aimless man named Braulio rambled without knowing who he was talking to. That old man is always meddling. It's like he thinks he owns the world. El Cuervo didn't reply. He just stared. His resentment boiled. And in his mind, an opportunity whispered. Today, he murmured, today you'll pay for taking what was mine. In the second circuit, just as the horses thundered past, El Cuervo positioned himself behind Matias. Next to him, a careless young man, the son of a tanner named Esteban, was watching the riders. Panfilo pushed him forcefully. Watch out. The young man fell onto Matias, who couldn't react in time. His body stumbled and rolled directly into the path of the horses. A scream pierced the air. Dolores, in the stands, cried out with her soul. Esteban also fell, trying to stand up. The hooves couldn't be stopped. One horse struck him brutally, throwing him into the air. Another couldn't avoid him and trampled him mercilessly. The crowd fell silent. Don Antonio ran in desperation. He dropped to his knees beside Matias' lifeless body, embraced him, and wiped his face with his own handkerchief. Matias! No! Please, hold on! He pleaded, eyes full of tears. But there was no answer. Matias was gone. Days later, witnesses approached Don Antonio. They told him about the push, the man's gesture before the accident. It was Panfilo the Crow. I saw him, said Braulio, now sober and trembling. I was with him. Don Antonio mounted his horse in fury. He rode paths, searched cantinas, knocked on doors. But the man had vanished. Like a coward, he disappeared into the night, leaving behind a crime unpunished. Matias' funeral was simple but full of love. From the estate's laborers to old leather traders, all attended with hats in hand and lowered gazes. The coffin was carried by Don Antonio, Esteban, Don Julian, and two workers Matias had trained in the early years of the hacienda. Dolores, dressed in black, her eyes sunken but tearless, approached the freshly planted cross. She spoke as if her father could hear her. Papa, you won't push my chair anymore. But every time the wind blows through these hills, I'll know you're with me. Don Antonio held her hand firmly, never letting go. Beside them, Elena wept openly, and Esteban couldn't stop staring at the ground, feeling guilty though he knew he wasn't responsible. Among the shadows of the mesquites, away from the group, a dark silhouette watched. It didn't move. It didn't speak. It just stared, with two eyes glowing like hot coals among the branches. I'll miss him every day, Don Antonio murmured. He left without meeting his grandchildren. Dolores sobbed. And without knowing he made me a better man, Antonio added with a choked voice. Father Lucas, an elderly priest, finished the prayer with a grave voice and blessed the grave. Matias was buried under the old mesquite, where years ago Don Antonio had seen him working with bleeding hands. Next to the tree, a simple cross was raised with a wooden sign that read, Here rests a dignified man. May the God of the just receive this man who died standing, as he lived. Thunder rumbled in the distance. And though no one knew why, everyone felt a chill. The dark figure turned and disappeared among the trees. No one saw it leave. But from that day on, some swore that at dusk, a shadow with glowing eyes could be seen among the branches, waiting. Chapter 4, The Curse of a Birth. Silence had settled over the Hacienda de los Montes like a thick shadow. Since Matias' death, Dolores no longer sang. Her face, once serene, now seemed carved from stone. Though Don Antonio cared for her tenderly, the absence of her father was an open wound that neither love nor time could heal. One afternoon, as they looked out from the terrace at the fields Matias had worked so hard, Dolores finally spoke. My father dreamed of seeing us surrounded by children, of watching grandchildren run through this land he loved so much. Don Antonio held her in silence. He too dreamed of that, but the years passed, and though they tried, the child never came. Dolores began praying each night with more intensity, visiting the corner of the mesquite tree where her father was buried. One day, she placed a candle there and whispered, "Father, if from heaven you can do something, do it. Not for me, but for him. I'm already broken." Doctors from the city said Dolores' condition might prevent her from carrying a child. But one day, a woman from the village, an old woman with trembling hands and eyes that seemed to see into the soul, came to the hacienda. She was a healer known as Madre Teodora. "I don't promise miracles," she said when welcomed into the kitchen by Elena, "but I know things doctors have forgotten. There are paths older than medicine." Desperate to give her husband a child, Dolores accepted. Under a palm-thatched roof, the healer touched her belly, gave her warm herbs, and adjusted her womb with firm hands and prayers in Nahuatl. When she finished, Teodora whispered, "If the heart is willing, the body obeys. But every gift comes with a price." Days later, Dolores felt a change within. Weeks after, the news was confirmed, she was pregnant. Upon hearing the news, Don Antonio dropped his tools, fell to his knees, and began to laugh like a child. He cried and laughed at the same time, embracing Dolores tightly. "He heard us, my love. He heard us. You will have a son, Antonio. I'll sing to him each night with the voice my father loved. And I'll teach him to walk, even if I have to carry him until he can." But as the due date neared, a fierce storm struck the town. The city doctor couldn't make it. Amid thunder, mud, and wind, Esteban and Braulio were sent to find Teodora. "Run! Bring her no matter what!" They rode through deep puddles and broken branches. Braulio shouted against the wind. "This rain is a punishment." "Or a test," replied Esteban. When they reached Teodora's hut, they found her seated beside a lit fire. "I knew you'd come," she said without standing. "Mrs. Dolores." Braulio gasped, "She's about to give birth." "Then let's go. It is already written." Meanwhile, Don Antonio rode through the rain, eyes narrowed against the downpour. Mud splashed his horse. Each lightning flash revealed his own desperation. He thought of Dolores, alone, in pain. "Hold on, love. Please hold on." When he reached the hacienda, soaked in tense, he saw the healer cleaning the child, surrounded by candles, incense, and jars of herbs. Dolores was exhausted, but alive. The baby, strong and with intense eyes, cried as if trying to break the world. Fury overtook him. "What is this woman doing here?" he shouted. "I saved your son, stranger," the old woman replied firmly. "He was born healthy because of these hands you despise. You are not God." Antonio snapped, snatching the child. "Get out of my house and never return." The old woman, her pride wounded and eyes full of scorn, paused at the door. She looked at the baby in his father's arms and murmured like a knife. "Just as you brought him into the world with rage, he will grow with rage. He will be strong, feared, and never know peace. This child will be your punishment. The blood you spill will return to you." And she left into the rain, her words echoing like a curse. Don Antonio chose not to tell Dolores what she had said. He only asked the town priest to bless the house and the child as soon as possible. But deep in his heart, a doubt began to grow, a dark seed planted by pride and superstition. At that very moment, in a crumbling hut on the edge of a ravine, a filthy man wrapped in rags and surrounded by garbage opened his eyes as if waking from a long sleep. A lightning bolt lit the darkest corner of his shelter. He rose, went to the broken window, and looked through the rain. "It has begun," he whispered. That child, Pedro, would grow up surrounded by care and blessings, but with an invisible inheritance, the shadow of a curse that had yet to reveal its fruits. Chapter 5, The Son of the Storm. From the day he was born, Pedro was different. Dolores often said that when she held him as a baby, his eyes would sometimes fix on invisible points, as if he could see things no one else could. The boy grew strong, healthy, but with a quiet, introspective demeanor. He didn't cry from hunger or pain, but from frustrations no one understood. The servants said Pedro was obedient, but only when he wanted to be. Sometimes, in the middle of games, he would shove the other children with excessive force, and if someone cried, he wouldn't apologize. He would simply watch, silently. One day, one of the workers found Pedro standing before a fallen bird's nest, holding a blood-stained stone. "What did you do, Pedro?" the man asked in horror. Pedro looked at him calmly and replied, "They weren't singing anymore." Another time, a newborn calf was found dead, with no sign of predators. No one spoke, but one of the farmhands claimed to have seen Pedro walking alone toward the stable the night before. Don Antonio loved him, but he couldn't ignore what he saw. He taught him to pray, to respect, to treat everyone with fairness. On one occasion, he sat him in front of the fireplace with a Bible in hand. "Son, respect isn't enforced through fear. It's earned with justice. Do you understand?" Pedro looked at him without emotion. "Yes, Father. I understand. What I'm supposed to say." Don Antonio frowned. "Don't tell me what you think I want to hear. Tell me what's in your heart." "My heart is learning," Pedro replied coldly. When his younger sister Isabella was born, the house filled with light. She was everything Pedro wasn't: cheerful, affectionate, curious, and full of tenderness. Don Antonio and Dolores believed her arrival would balance the soul of their home. One morning, Pedro approached Dolores while she was brushing Isabella's hair. "Do you love her more because she smiles all the time?" he asked bluntly. Dolores looked at him, surprised. "Pedro, children aren't loved for what they do, but for who they are. I love you just the same." "Then why do you look at me less?" he said, lowering his voice. "Because sometimes it hurts not knowing if you're okay, son," she answered sadly. In Pedro, Isabella's presence ignited a flame of jealousy and rage that, though never openly expressed, manifested in glances, long silences, and an ever-growing coldness. As he grew, Pedro began to show great skill in business, accounting, and managing the hacienda. But he also developed a tendency to manipulate, to divide the workers, to sow fear with his mere presence. Those who disobeyed him lost their place without explanation. Those who showed weakness were silently humiliated. One afternoon, while Isabella read beneath a tree, Pedro approached and snatched the book from her hands. "Don't waste time dreaming, sister. The world belongs to those who rule it, not to those who hide in stories." Isabella looked at him silently, then said, "Brother, you could be as great as you dream if you stopped being afraid of love." Pedro clenched the book tightly, feeling her words pierce him. He hated that look. He felt it diminished him, as if deep down he knew something was broken inside him, and that everyone, especially her, could see it. Dolores' heart, meanwhile, began to deteriorate. Walks became difficult. The coughing became constant. At night, she could be heard crying softly, and Don Antonio held her close, not knowing how to console her. One time, feeling gravely ill, Dolores called Pedro and his sister to her room. The light was dim. Curtains drawn. She lay pale, a shawl over her shoulders. "My children," she said, her voice trembling, "I want to tell you something I carry deep in my soul." Isabella sat beside her, holding her hand. Pedro remained standing, silent. "I love you more than I can explain. My greatest wish is to see you grow, marry, build your lives. Oh, God! It pains me to think I might not be here to see it." Dolores broke down in tears. Isabella also began crying, embracing her. But at that moment, Dolores looked up at Pedro, and her heart shattered. On her son's face there were no tears. No sadness. Only a smirk. A faint smile, as if savoring the pain around him. His eyes sparkled, not from emotion, but from something she had never wanted to see. "Pedro, why are you looking at me like that?" "You're being very dramatic today, Mother," he replied coldly. Dolores closed her eyes, as if wanting to sleep and never wake up. Don Antonio, who had just entered, heard the last words and could only embrace her tightly. The years passed. The hacienda prospered. Dolores weakened with each season. Don Antonio grew older, still hoping that one day his son would reveal the noble heart he had always prayed to God for. One night, while Pedro helped him close the accounting books, Don Antonio stared at him for a long time. "Have you ever felt compassion, Pedro?" he asked softly. Pedro closed the ledger and said, "I've felt efficiency, Father. And that's what keeps this hacienda alive." Don Antonio looked down, wounded by the reply. What he didn't know was that the curse uttered under the rain still lived, dormant, waiting for its moment to fully reveal itself. Chapter 6, The Seed of Pain. Pedro was already 12 years old when his darkness began to manifest more clearly. The Hacienda de los Montes lived in peace, but inside Don Antonio's eldest son, something was growing. It was like a thorn embedded in the soul, a silent inheritance of the curse that had been pronounced on the day of his birth. That same year, Don Antonio received an unexpected visit from Spain, his mother, Dona Carlota, a woman of stern bearing but a just soul. She had come to spend some time with the family, moved by the desire to meet her grandchildren. From the moment she arrived, Carlota felt a special bond with Isabella. "Grandmother, do you want me to read you a story?" Isabella asked one afternoon as they sat weaving together on the terrace. "Of course, my dear. Your voice is like your mother's song. But tell me, has Pedro always been this distant?" Isabella lowered her gaze, clutching the edge of the book. "Pedro, sometimes he scares me. He pushes me for no reason, yells at me over nothing. Sometimes he laughs when I cry." Carlotta frowned. "Has he ever hurt you?" "One time, he cut my hair while I was sleeping. He said it was a joke." "That's not a joke, sweetheart. That's cruelty disguised as play." Pedro, unaware of the conversation, was beginning to enjoy the power he felt over others. He played small tricks on Isabella just to see her reaction. He terrified her for fun. One stormy night, fate took an even darker turn. The wind howled through the walls, thunder tore through the sky like whips, and the hacienda seemed to shrink under the force of nature. Isabella couldn't sleep. She clutched her pillow, eyes wide open. Then, her bedroom door creaked open. Pedro's figure appeared in the shadows. Isabella, heart pounding, could barely make him out. "Pedro," she whispered. Lightning briefly lit up his face. His eyes gleamed with an unnatural light. Behind his back, he hid a pair of pruning shears, gripped tightly. "What are you doing here?" Isabella asked with a trembling voice. Pedro didn't answer. He just stepped closer, slowly. Isabella screamed. In that moment, Carlotta burst into the room and lit the oil lamp. The light revealed Pedro's face and the shears in his hand. "Are you insane?" Carlotta shouted in fury. "What were you going to do to your sister? You're a monster." Pedro slowly lowered the shears, showing no remorse. That same night, a devastated Don Antonio made a painful decision. He took Pedro to the barn, under the relentless rain. "I've spoken to you with patience. I've loved you with all my heart, and you." He tied his hands to a thick post. "I never struck you. I never thought I'd come to this, and maybe that was my mistake. Maybe I'm more to blame than you for not correcting you sooner. My son, this will hurt me more than it will hurt you. This tears me apart, but if it's for your good, so be it." Don Antonio took a whip and lashed his son's back. Once, twice, 3 times, until the skin began to split. Pedro didn't scream. He didn't cry. He looked at him with a mix of defiance and dark pleasure. "Look at me well, father," Pedro shouted through clenched teeth. "Because these images will haunt you for the rest of your life." Don Antonio dropped the whip, fell to his knees, and broke into tears. Pedro, bound and wounded, smiled. It was not a smile of pain, but of control. The next day, Dona Carlotta, after long hours of sleepless thought, approached Don Antonio. "My son. I can't stay silent. Not after what I saw. Isabella is not safe here. I will take her to Spain. There she will grow up far from fear, in a place where she can flourish without fearing for her life." Don Antonio, his face aged by anguish, nodded slowly. "Perhaps it's for the best. At least someone in this family should have peace." And so, with tearful goodbyes and promises of frequent letters, Isabella left with her grandmother, leaving behind a hacienda that had once been her home, and a brother whose shadow seemed to grow ever longer. And so, the seed of pain once sown in the rain, began to bear its bitterest fruits. Chapter 7: The Weight of Betrayal. The village fair was celebrated every year with overflowing joy. There was live music, traditional games, food everywhere, and proud riders parading through the streets. Entire families wore their best clothes, and children ran between candy and snack stands. This time, Pedro was 16 years old, and his sister Isabella had already blossomed into a young woman. Don Antonio, though aged, still walked with his head held high, proud of his estate, the Hacienda de los Montes, and of his children. Pedro attended the festival with a more relaxed expression than usual. There he reunited with Roberto, a strong, humble, and hard-working young man with whom he shared childhood memories. Also present were Jacinto, the joker of the group, and Simón, a quiet but loyal young man. Together, they had formed a sort of brotherhood since adolescence. But Pedro's bond with Roberto was closer. They had ridden horses together, worked in the stables, and shared secrets no one else ever heard. That afternoon, Pedro also reunited with Victoria, a friend from secondary school. With her black braids and clear smile, Victoria had grown into a beautiful, elegant, and sweet woman. During the festival, she approached Pedro and asked him to dance. Surprised by her initiative, Pedro accepted. They danced a slow song under hanging lights and the curious eyes of the town. For the first time in years, Pedro felt something like relief. His heart, for a few minutes, ceased to be stone. Days later, moved by that moment, Pedro confessed to Roberto. "I fell in love with her," said Pedro, looking out over the horizon from the corral. "I don't know what she did to me, but when she took my hand, something inside me changed." Roberto remained silent. He clenched his jaw. He didn't say he had loved Victoria for years or that he had decided to confess his feelings. Weeks later, Pedro received the news: Roberto had proposed, and Victoria had accepted. The news shattered him inside, but he didn't show it. He feigned joy. Even when asked to be the best man, he agreed with a cold smile. During the reception, Pedro toasted the couple. Jacinto and Simón stood beside him, laughing, unaware of the shadow in his eyes. "To the newlyweds!" shouted Jacinto. "And may they have many children!" added Simón. Pedro raised his glass and muttered, "Yes, children who don't repeat the mistakes of their parents." That night, Pedro went to the village cantina. Deep into the night and several drinks in, he murmured something that would spark disaster. Sometimes, women don't wait for the ring to give themselves. One of the half-drunk patrons overheard him. "Who are you talking about, Pedro?" he asked, intrigued. Pedro raised an eyebrow, set down his glass, and said, "Who do you think?" "Victoria." "Your compadre's woman?" said the man, eyes wide. Pedro smiled with disdain. Weak flesh needs no permission. The news spread like wildfire. It reached Roberto's ears. He didn't ask. He didn't yell. He simply changed inside. From that day on, he treated Victoria with cold indifference. She endured it in silence, confused. "Is something wrong, Roberto?" Victoria asked one afternoon while serving him coffee. "Nothing. Maybe I'm just finally seeing who you really are," he replied without looking at her. I don't understand," she whispered, hurt. "Maybe you're not supposed to." "Everything's already been said," Roberto concluded, rising from the table. Months later, after a day of work and unspoken tension, Roberto returned home to find Victoria feeding their baby. She sang a soft melody to soothe her. Roberto stood in the doorway, heartbroken. "Why?" he suddenly asked. "Why what?" she responded, puzzled. "Why did you choose him first? Before me?" he shouted, tears in his eyes. Victoria set the spoon down, frightened. "What are you talking about? Pedro is just your friend. Nothing ever happened between us." "Liar!" Roberto roared. "He said so. He screamed it in the cantina. Everyone knows. My God, Roberto. He was drunk. How can you believe him?" But it was too late. Blinded by pain, Roberto drew a knife from his belt. Victoria, still holding the child, backed away. "No, Roberto. Please. You destroyed me," he screamed, and in one swift motion, stabbed her in the chest. Victoria collapsed, bleeding, as the baby cried uncontrollably. Pedro, with a bad feeling, arrived soon after. He entered the house, the smell of blood hitting him like a wall. He found Roberto kneeling by the body. "What have you done?" Pedro asked, frozen. You started this," Roberto screamed, his eyes wild. "You said you were with her." "I lied," Pedro said softly. "I said it drunk. It was a lie." "Lie?" Roberto roared. "Your eyes said otherwise." Pedro slowly approached, unafraid. "Look at me now, Roberto. Do you see anything in my eyes now?" Roberto sobbed, trembling. Victoria's blood soaked the floor. "What have I done? My God!" "Go," Pedro ordered, with chilling calm. "Before the law gets here. Go to the mountains. I'll care for your daughter." Roberto stood still. You'll care for her?" Yes. I'll protect her as if she were mine. But don't forget this, one day I'll come for you. Not for her, but for me." Roberto, soul shattered, kissed his daughter's forehead and fled into the trees. Pedro, silent, took the baby in his arms. He looked at Victoria's lifeless body. Closed his eyes. He didn't cry. He simply thought, "I'll let you live like an animal. But one day, I'll come for you." And thus, in the midst of blood, weeping, and darkness, Pedro sealed another promise of vengeance, savoring the pain born from his own words. Chapter 8, The Legacy of Pain. After Victoria's murder, Pedro took the child in his arms and brought her to the hacienda. He didn't keep her immediately. First, he gave her to his mother, Dolores. She, though already aged and tired, accepted to care for the little girl without asking questions, knowing that something grave had happened. "Whose child is she?" Dolores asked, looking at Pedro with tenderness. "Someone who's not coming back. Take care of her, Mama, for now." As the years passed, Pedro watched the girl grow. Every time he looked into her eyes, he felt a blow to his chest. They were Victoria's eyes. Over time, and after the death of Dolores and Don Antonio, Pedro was left in charge of everything. Although he initially tried to be a good man, without his parents he began to grow cold and irresponsible. He lost interest in the land, in the workers, and in life itself. Only the girl kept him going. He called her my daughter in front of everyone, though he never dared to tell her who her real mother was. One afternoon, while Pedro smoked on the porch, the girl approached him timidly with a drawing in her hands. "Papa?" she said softly. Pedro looked up, surprised. "What did you say?" "Papa, look, I drew us both," she said, showing him a wrinkled paper with two stick figures, one taller and one with braids. Pedro took the drawing without knowing what to say. His jaw trembled, but not a single tear fell. From then on, the girl began to seek him out more often. She hugged him from behind, waited for him with a cup of milk at night, and fell asleep by his door if he wouldn't let her in. "Why are you so serious, Papa? Did I make you mad?" "No, Nina. It's not you," Pedro would say curtly, and walk away with a heart tied in knots. But each loving gesture from the girl was like a burning nail in Pedro's chest. It melted him and, at the same time, filled him with even more hatred toward Roberto. "You took her mother from me," he murmured in the dark. "But I won't let you have your daughter. I'll love her so much that you'll rot with pain." One night at the town cantina, a mysterious man approached him. He called himself El Cuervo. Tall, with a piercing gaze and a scar across his face. "They say you pay well for certain jobs," El Cuervo said, his raspy voice dragging like ash. Pedro looked him up and down, letting the silence stretch before answering. "And do you do them well?" El Cuervo leaned closer, his eyes dark like bottomless pits. "Not only do I do them well, I enjoy them. I turn them into art. I've been where screams don't escape, where crying doesn't matter. Even where a man named Matias died." Pedro narrowed his eyes. The name chilled his blood. "You knew him?" "Let's say I was part of the accident," El Cuervo replied with a twisted smile. "And if you want, I can be part of many more." Pedro studied him carefully. An image flashed in his mind, the death of his grandfather Matias, that accident that had marked his mother Dolores's life. His face changed. "It was you?" Pedro whispered, in disbelief. "Yes," said El Cuervo without blinking. "I pushed him to his death. And I don't regret it." Pedro lowered his gaze for a moment. Anyone else would have killed him on the spot. But not Pedro. His thirst for revenge, his obsession with punishing Roberto, was stronger than the pain of the past. "Then maybe you have a place here. I've got another job. I need you to find a man, and bring him to me alive." "Name?" "Roberto." El Cuervo raised an eyebrow, savoring the assignment. "And what do you want intact? The soul? Or just the body?" Pedro leaned in and whispered. "I want him to keep the fear. Everything else, do what you must." Months passed, and El Cuervo delivered. He returned with Roberto, dirty, wounded, in chains. Pedro waited in the barn, beneath a single lamp casting long shadows. "I thought you were dead," Pedro said without emotion. "Maybe I should have been," Roberto replied, his voice hoarse. Pedro stood slowly, walked toward him, and stared him down. "You know what hurts the most? That because of one stupid comment, you destroyed the one I loved most. The girl, your daughter, lives without a mother because of you. And you think I'm alive?" Roberto spat. "Every night I see her. In my dreams. In my nightmares. There is no worse punishment." Pedro signaled to El Cuervo, who pulled out a small vial. "This won't kill you right away, but it will make every day hell. You're going to drink it." Roberto hesitated, but finally took the vial. Pedro leaned in and whispered. "And when you can't take it anymore, you'll remember this was my revenge." Pedro ordered Roberto to be locked in a small shack at the far edge of the hacienda. He forbade everyone from approaching it. Days later, Pedro asked for something more, for Roberto's hometown to be burned down and a red rose to be brought to him. When it was delivered, Pedro held it carefully, then violently pressed it into Roberto's back, forcing the thorns deep into his flesh. Every time he moved, the pain made him scream. "Now," Pedro whispered, "pain will be your shadow." And so, with his soul growing darker, Pedro believed he had finally achieved justice. But what he didn't know was that his own soul had become something even darker than what he once swore to destroy. Chapter 9: The Echo of the Thunder. After Roberto's death, Pedro stopped talking to everyone. There was no funeral, no tears. Just silence. He locked himself in the hacienda, accompanied only by El Cuervo, who had become his constant shadow. "You're the last of your lineage now," said El Cuervo, pouring him mezcal. "No one understands you anymore, except me. Pedro didn't respond. He only drank. Day and night. Over time, his body became skin and bones. There were days when he didn't eat, only drank. His beard grew out of control, his eyes sunk into darkness. El Cuervo visited every morning like a loyal brother, but behind every word, his true purpose was hidden, to destroy Pedro from within. They didn't deserve you, he'd whisper. Not your mother, your father, or that woman. They all failed you. I didn't. You were just a boy when they missed the chance to shape you, Cuervo would murmur. But I can finish what life left undone. Have you noticed how everyone you loved either betrayed you or died? He'd add. But I'm still here. Not out of loyalty, but because you're like me. And sooner or later, you'll accept it. El Cuervo brought dark books, spoke of ancient doctrines, planted ideas that pain was power and that suffering was the only way to dominate the world. Love weakens, he whispered while Pedro dozed in a chair. But hate gives you vision. Pedro nodded, his eyes lost. Hatred kept him going. Meanwhile, the girl grew up in silence. She watched him drift like a ghost through the halls of the hacienda. She didn't understand why her dad no longer smiled. One night, the sky broke into storm. Lightning tore through the darkness, and wind battered the windows. In Pedro's room, all was shadow and empty bottles. Sitting on the edge of the bed, staring at nothing, he heard a soft creak. Who's there? He asked, his voice hoarse. A small figure approached. It was the girl, in her white nightgown, eyes full of tears. She walked slowly, trembling with fear and cold. Daddy! She whispered. Don't die. Pedro looked at her. Felt her tiny hand wrap around his. Something inside him cracked. The hate, the rage, the pain, all echoed like the thunder that lit the room. What am I doing? He said, voice breaking. She hugged him. He held her, for the first time in years. That night, Pedro cried. Silently, for all he had lost. The next day, Pedro rose early. He shaved, bathed, and stepped outside to feel the sun. El Cuervo watched him from a distance, surprised. What are you doing? He asked. Living, Pedro replied. From that day on, everything changed. He sent the girl to school in town, then later to the city. He bought her books, nice clothes, taught her about the hacienda. He regained his weight, his presence, his respect. Every corner of the house filled with life again. The girl grew up in an environment filled with love. Pedro told her stories, they cooked together, walked the fields. For the first time, Pedro felt useful, not as a landowner, but as a father. One afternoon, as they shared a snack in the gallery, she asked. Dad, have you ever been afraid? Pedro looked at the horizon, thoughtful. We're all afraid, daughter. The difference is what we do with it. Still, deep in his soul, Pedro knew the darkness hadn't left. It was only asleep, waiting for a new thunder to awaken it. And behind every shadow, El Cuervo was still there, watching, waiting for his moment. One day, Pedro found El Cuervo cleaning a rifle in the barn. He stopped to watch him and said with a tone of doubt and suspicion. You never told me where you really come from. El Cuervo smiled without looking up. From the same hell as you, Pedro. And my grandfather? Pedro asked, suddenly tense. Did you know him? El Cuervo looked up, his smile wider than ever. Of course. He was the first to scream when he saw me. The last to bleed when I left. Pedro stepped back. His breath quickened. The man who killed Matias was standing before him. The man who had shattered a part of his childhood. You killed him, he whispered. Yes. And I don't regret it, said El Cuervo, stepping closer. But look at you now. Will you kill me or keep giving me orders? You know you need me. Pedro stared at him. He wanted to kill him. But his plans for vengeance against the world were stronger than his pain. He clenched his fists, trembling, and nodded. Yes. I need you. But never forget I'm the one in charge. El Cuervo smiled. He knew darkness still lived in Pedro. And as long as that shadow remained, he had a place in his soul. From that day on, El Cuervo took on more control at the hacienda. He made decisions without consulting. Punished workers harshly. Pedro noticed, but did nothing. It was as if his soul were still lost in the fog. The land doesn't obey the weak, said El Cuervo. Sometimes you must get your hands dirty for it to bloom. Workers began to fear him more than Pedro. Some left without a word. Others disappeared. One morning, Pedro found a note in the kitchen, written in the shaky hand of one of the oldest workers. The patron no longer rules. Now fear does. Pedro read it in silence. Then looked out the window. El Cuervo was in the corral, barking orders at two armed young men. Pedro clenched his teeth. Something stirred inside him. It wasn't hate, it was fire. Perhaps, the beginning of his awakening. Chapter 10, The Beast That Awoke. Years had passed, and the estate was no longer the same. Pedro, still burdened by his past and trying to redeem himself as a father, realized he couldn't handle it all alone. That's when he made a decision that would mark a new dark chapter. He named El Cuervo as foreman. I need you, he said one afternoon as they looked out over the fields. I can't do this on my own anymore. El Cuervo, with his crooked smile, accepted without hesitation. But over time, the man who had appeared to be an ally began devouring what remained of the estate. Power made him cruel. He mistreated the workers, humiliated the humble, and secretly abused women under threat. No one dared speak. Fear had a name, and that name was Cuervo. The accounts were emptied, the cattle vanished, and the land, once fertile, dried up as if justice itself refused to live there. At night, El Cuervo would gather in the barn with shady men, drinking, laughing, and telling blood-soaked stories with a chilling delight. One night, Pedro approached the barn after hearing laughter. And what happened to the widow who asked for more time to pay? One of the men asked. I gave her 3 days, Cuervo replied with a laugh. On the 4th, she woke up with no chickens, and no pride. And the old man who refused to sell? Cuervo pulled out his knife, playing with it. A little scare to his heart, and that was enough. Now his son wants to leave town. Pedro listened in silence, his soul torn, still unwilling to intervene. That was when Rebeca returned from abroad. Her arrival brought fresh air to the old house. The young woman, now strong and determined, silently observed the decay. It only took her a few days to notice what others were too afraid to say. One afternoon, crossing the corral, she heard yelling. She approached and saw Cuervo threatening a worker with a machete. I'll teach you to show respect, you dog. Enough! Shouted Rebeca, with a fury that even surprised Cuervo. You don't treat people like that, especially not on the estate my grandfather founded. Cuervo slowly lowered the machete and looked at her with disdain. And who are you to give orders? The city girl playing lady of the manor? I'm the voice that will silence you. That night, Rebeca went to see Pedro. She explained what she had seen, what she had heard, and what she suspected. But Pedro, blinded by his debt to Cuervo, simply said, That man stood by me when everyone else turned their backs. Don't come stirring things up now. Rebeca left with a heavy heart. But she didn't give up. For weeks, she began gathering information. She spoke with workers in secret. She listened. Took notes. Sought documents. Until, one stormy night, she decided it was time. She waited for him in the barn. Cuervo entered, and seeing her holding a flashlight and a folder, he scoffed. Waiting for me, little doll? How brave. I'm not a little doll, Rebeca replied firmly. And here I have all the proof of what you've done, accounts, testimonies, names. If anything happens to me, I've already sent everything to someone who will take care of you. And if I do it now? Who's going to protect you? I don't need protection, she answered, locking eyes with him. You disgust me. And I'm not afraid. The terror you've spread here ends tonight. Cuervo paused. For the first time, he hesitated. She didn't back down. The barn fell silent, broken only by the sound of rain on the roof. The next morning, as Rebecca stepped out of her room, she witnessed a horrifying scene from the second-floor hallway. Below, near the well, Cuervo was furiously beating a skinny young man who had come from the river carrying a bucket of water. I told you foremen come first, not sick old men. The young man, named Juan, writhed in the mud, shielding the bucket. He was bringing it to wash his bedridden father. Rebecca ran downstairs. Stop it. Are you insane? Cuervo looked at her with a crooked smile. Without a word, he placed one heavy boot on Juan's head, pressing down hard. One more step, princess, and I'll smash him like a watermelon. Rebecca trembled. She looked at Juan, struggling to breathe. She lowered her gaze. Cuervo laughed with contempt, spat on the ground, and walked away. Learn who's in charge here. Rebecca rushed to Juan, helped him up, cleaned his face with the handkerchief from her pocket, and without a word, accompanied him to the river to fetch more water. Together, they washed Juan's father in the humble shack where they lived. They spoke little, but a silent bond formed between them. From that day, a deep friendship was born. Days later, beneath the shadow of the abandoned mill, a dozen workers gathered in silence. Among them were young men with calloused hands, women with hardened eyes, and old men who had seen too much injustice. One stood before them, Rebecca at his side. She was the only one brave enough to stop him, said Juan. And she did it not with a machete, but with dignity. So what do you suggest? Asked an older worker. That we rise up and take him down all at once? No, Rebecca replied. I suggest we bring him down with his own shadow. I have evidence, and soon, I'll have more. What I need is your word. Your loyalty. And your silence. My brother disappeared after standing up to Cuervo, said a young peon. If this brings justice, I'm in. He threatened my daughter, added a peasant woman. And I won't stay silent ever again. I haven't believed in anything for years, said an old man, but maybe something good can still be done for this land. Juan nodded. They're with you. We're all with you. Rebecca looked at them with resolve. Cuervo won't fall from a scream. He'll fall from 100 silent steps surrounding him, leaving him with no ground to stand on. That night, as Juan and Rebecca walked back through the trees, he broke the silence. Never thought a city girl would be braver than all the men here. And I never thought I'd find such a loyal friend in the mud, she replied with a faint smile. They looked at each other with respect, almost with affection. This is just beginning, Juan. But one thing's certain, with you by my side, I'm not afraid. And as the wind rustled the dry trees, they both knew Cuervo's days were numbered. Because Juan wasn't alone. Behind him were dozens of men and women, tired of silence. And with Rebecca's cunning at the helm, the beast that once slept on the estate had awoken. Chapter 11, The Secret Plan. The alliance between Rebecca and Juan had grown strong in silence, like the roots of a tree growing unnoticed. They knew they had to act wisely, because the enemy was fierce, and time was not on their side. El Cuervo had 37 armed and trained allies, many of them ex-military or thugs brought from other regions. Meanwhile, the workers of the estate numbered 50 on-site and 26 off-site, but with a major disadvantage. Among them were elders, inexperienced youth, and minors. They had no weapons, no training, and no guarantees. Rebecca and Juan planned carefully. They knew that any mistake could cost lives. At first, recruiting people was difficult. Not everyone could be trusted. Pedro's wealth and the fear of El Cuervo made many willing to sell out to the highest bidder. they had to watch, test, and only then invite someone to join. It was a game of patience and risk. One night, Rebecca and Juan were talking near the old mill. "I don't know if this will work, Juan. I see them getting more scared every day. They're scared because, for the first time, they have something to lose, but also because, for the first time, they have something worth fighting for," Juan replied, turning on a flashlight to see the map spread on the table. "Pedro is my father, but if he doesn't fall, none of this will matter. What he's become is not your fault. Don't confuse blood with justice, Rebecca." In the nearby towns, Juan also tried to gain support. One scene took place in a local butcher shop with an old acquaintance. "Tabulo, we need men. Ours are starting to lose faith. Even one or two who can help us organize." The butcher looked down. "Juan, I respect you, but you're crazy if you think anyone around here will go up against Pedro. That man's bought even the silence of the dead. So you're just going to watch us die from here? I'm going to look after my kids. I'm sorry." Juan left without another word, his rage bottled inside. At the police station, Rebecca was speaking with an officer. "We need help. There are threatened women, beaten workers, and illegal weapons on the estate." The commander leafed through the folder without interest. "If you don't bring solid, verifiable evidence, we can't act. We don't want another scandal. Bring witnesses. Documentation. Recordings. And in the meantime? They keep killing us in silence." The commander looked her straight in the eyes. "I understand, miss. But you're asking me to enter the property of one of the most powerful men in the region. I need more than words." Pedro and El Cuervo also met in private. One night, in an office lit only by an oil lamp. "Something's off, Pedro," said El Cuervo, spinning his glass of mezcal on the table. "They don't greet the same. They don't lower their heads anymore." Pedro took a sip. "Maybe you're overreacting. The girl came and stirred things up. That girl isn't innocent. Look how she moves, how she asks questions. There's fire in her eyes. If you ask me, she's planting something." Pedro cut him off. "Just make sure you don't go too far." El Cuervo glared at him. "Don't tell me how to do my job, Pedro. I keep this estate under control." Pedro sighed and stood up. "Just don't forget that control can turn against us, too." Back at the estate, Juan and Rebecca gathered the few workers still willing to fight. "If anyone doubts this, you're free to leave," said Juan, looking at the downcast faces in the dim barn. "What if they kill us?" asked a woman, her eyes brimming with tears. "What if we do nothing? Will we stay slaves until our children forget what freedom even is?" Rebecca responded. A young man raised his hand. "I'm staying. My father died working in this hell. I won't stay silent." Days passed. The nights grew colder. Fear spread, and with it, loneliness. Even the bravest began to waver. But one night, under a moon fractured by dark clouds, Juan ran to meet Rebecca. He was soaked, his eyes glowing with excitement. "Rebecca!" She turned, startled. "What is it?" Juan grabbed her by the shoulders, breathing heavily. "It's not just the police, the military is with us too. They're working on a plan to rescue us. They're going to intervene. This is going to end." Rebecca froze. Tears spilled down her cheeks, and she collapsed into Juan's chest. He held her tightly. "We're going to get Pedro and El Cuervo out of here, and this time, they won't be coming back." The beast had awakened, but now, so had hope. What will happen to Rebecca and Juan? Will they manage to free the estate before it's too late? This story is just beginning to burn. Don't miss the upcoming chapters that will bring the first part of Amor Hacendado to its climax, where every decision comes with a price, and the truth will finally come to light. Get ready for the ending. Follow me and subscribe to my channel, and don't forget to click the bell so you'll be the first to know when the next chapter is released. Thank you for making it this far, for feeling, imagining, and enduring alongside the characters in this story. May each page have sparked something in your heart, and may you return with the same passion to discover what fate awaits them. With all my love. José Alejandro Trujillo.